The sun baked the quiet suburban street, casting long shadows across neatly trimmed lawns and identical brick houses. A thin yellow strip of caution tape fluttered in the summer breeze, stretching across the entrance of one particular yard. A yard that belonged to a man who kept mostly to himself. To passing neighbors, he was just another homeowner. Calm, reserved, fit, with a quiet strength about him. His dark eyes rarely lingered on gossip. His routine never drew attention. But on this day, something was different. A pair of black SUVs rolled in slowly, deliberately, their tinted windows masking the men inside. The doors opened, and out stepped three individuals wearing tactical vests marked with bold yellow letters. Community enforcement. They carried themselves with authority, with the unmistakable edge of men who thrived on intimidation. Their presence was designed to unnerve. The leader of the trio adjusted his sunglasses and scanned the street. Children's laughter from down the block quieted. Curtain twitched. And then silence. They weren't police. Not really. But the uniforms, the equipment, the clipped tone, they gave the illusion of power. An illusion was often enough to bend people into submission. But today they had chosen the wrong house. The man they came for stood outside, dressed casually in a fitted charcoal shirt that showed the build of someone accustomed to discipline, not vanity. His posture was calm, his arms folded lightly across his chest. He wasn't scared. He wasn't confused. He was calculating. Unbeknownst to the men in tactical vests, the supposed ordinary homeowner was no ordinary man. He was one of the FBI's most elusive and respected field agents. A man who had operated undercover in places where hesitation meant death, who had faced down international cartels, arms traffickers, and spies. To criminals around the world, his name was spoken in fear. But here, in the quiet safety of suburbia, he was just Marcus. The community enforcement squad didn't know who they were dealing with. They thought they were about to stage a simple show of control, perhaps force compliance, maybe even make an arrest to justify their presence. Instead, they had just walked into the quiet storm of a man who had spent his life dismantling organizations exactly like theirs. And the moment their eyes locked, the air thickened. The story that unfolded next was one of deception, courage, and revelation. An encounter that would turn this quiet street into the setting for a clash between fake authority and true justice. The street had the stillness of a Sunday morning, the kind of suburban calm that convinced people nothing bad could ever happen here. The lawns were bright green, trimmed to perfection, and the rhythmic chirp of cicadas hung in the heavy summer air. On any other day, neighbors would have been outside watering their flowers, kids riding their bikes up and down the cul-de-sac, parents chatting idly about schools and weekend plans. But on this day, something unsettled the peace. It started with the sound of engines, two black SUVs easing down the road with an intentional slowness. Their presence was out of place here, like wolves wandering through a field of sheep. Windows rolled up, tinted black, no music, no laughter. Just silence, broken only by the crunch of tires against pavement as they came to a stop in front of Marcus's home. The doors opened in unison, almost rehearsed. Out stepped three men, each dressed in tactical khaki pants and fitted shirts, covered with bulletproof vests that read in bold yellow, "Community Enforcement." At first glance, they might have passed for law enforcement. But something about the way they moved, the exaggerated stiffness, the puffed-up swagger, suggested otherwise. They weren't here to protect. They were here to dominate. The tallest of the three, bald with dark sunglasses and arms like tree trunks, immediately took the lead. His hand rested on the belt at his waist, fingers tapping near a pair of steel handcuffs. Beside him, another man scanned the neighborhood with restless eyes, as though measuring the fear in every curtain that shifted. The third, leaner but equally menacing, adjusted his vest and spoke quietly into a radio clipped to his shoulder. Then came the woman. She wasn't dressed like them. No tactical vest, no sunglasses. Instead, she wore a sharp navy suit, a clipboard in one hand, a pen in the other. Her blonde bob framed a face of forced authority, the type that came from borrowed power. She didn't look like someone in charge of a tactical unit. She looked like someone trying to make it look official. Together, they crossed the street toward Marcus's yard. The leader with the sunglasses barked orders in a voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear, his tone designed to project control. "Sir, step forward. This is an official matter of the Community Enforcement Division." The words rang false. Official? Community enforcement? It sounded fabricated, but the vest and the demeanor were enough to confuse anyone unfamiliar with real authority. That was the trick. These men relied on fear, not legitimacy. Marcus stood at the edge of his driveway, arms loose at his sides. His expression betrayed no fear, no confusion, only watchfulness. His mind catalogued every detail. Their formation, the way the leader's eyes twitched when he spoke, the subtle smirk of the second man as he noticed curtains shifting behind glass. They wanted an audience. This wasn't just about him, they wanted to show something. The woman stepped forward, flipping a page on her clipboard. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed. "Marcus Johnson, you are in violation of multiple community codes. You've been cited, warned, and now we've been authorized to remove you from the premises for non-compliance." Neighbors' ears perked at that. Remove him? For not following community rules? It didn't sound right, but wrapped in the costume of authority, it sounded just close enough to believable to make people hesitate. Marcus didn't move. He didn't flinch. Instead, his calm gaze swept over each of them, like a man measuring the weight of pawns in a game he'd played many times before. He could see it in their body language, their arrogance, their reliance on intimidation, their expectation that fear would do the work for them. But Marcus was not afraid. The bald leader stepped closer, steel handcuffs dangling from his fist like a threat. His voice dropped into a growl. "You can make this easy, or you can make this hard. Either way, we're leaving with you today." Marcus tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth barely twitching into what might have been a smile. He didn't answer. He simply studied the men as if memorizing their patterns, calculating. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Marcus had spent years unmasking groups exactly like this. He had infiltrated cartels, taken down domestic militias, and dismantled rings that thrived on false authority. This wasn't his first time standing in front of imposters playing dress-up with borrowed power. But never before had the performance come so close to his own front door. Behind him, the brick home stood steady, a picture of ordinary suburban life. But Marcus knew it was no longer an ordinary day. The moment these men arrived, pretending to wield authority, they had crossed into dangerous territory. And the irony, the delicious, cutting irony, was that they believed they were the predators in this encounter. In truth, they had just walked into the den of a hunter far more skilled than they could ever imagine. As the woman with the clipboard raised her pen again, ready to speak, Marcus finally shifted. He straightened, uncrossed his arms, and let his calm voice roll across the yard, firm but quiet enough to make them lean in. "You boys really should have done your homework." The words hung in the air like a spark, a subtle promise that the game they thought they were playing was about to turn into something else entirely. The silence that followed Marcus's words was thick, as if the entire neighborhood had suddenly stopped to hold its breath. A child's bike wheel clicked faintly in the distance, then stilled. Curtains across the street parted just enough for watchful eyes to peek through, only to quickly retreat behind the safety of fabric. The bald enforcer with the handcuffs smirked, mistaking Marcus's calm for bluff. He stepped closer, boots grinding against the pavement, the weight of false authority heavy in each stride. He was used to this moment, the tipping point where fear buckled knees and forced compliance. He leaned in, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting Marcus's steady gaze back at him. "You think this is a game? Step forward. Now." Marcus didn't move. Instead, his tone softened, almost conversational, but it cut sharper than any raised voice. Funny thing about authority. The real kind doesn't need to announce itself with stunts and costumes. The clipboard woman stiffened, her lips parting as if to interrupt. But Marcus's voice carried an assurance, a weight she hadn't expected. She faltered, eyes flickering toward the neighbor's windows. She hadn't come for a debate. She'd come to stage a scene, and somehow she was already losing control of it. The second enforcer, the restless one who kept glancing around, finally snapped. He pulled his vest straight and barked at Marcus with an aggression meant to rattle him. "You're out of compliance with community standards. That's an arrestable offense under our authority. Don't make us drag you out." A laugh, deep and low, rolled from Marcus's chest. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't even cruel. It was the kind of laugh that unsettled men who relied on intimidation, the laugh of someone who had seen far darker threats than this cheap imitation. "Arrestable offense?" Marcus echoed, his tone calm but edged with incredulity. "You've rehearsed your lines well, but let me guess. You think the badge on your chest and a clipboard in her hand are enough to make this real?" The leader's jaw tightened. His fingers squeezed around the handcuffs until the metal rattled. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by someone who refused to cower. He stepped even closer, so near now that his shadow fell across Marcus's chest. Behind them, a door creaked open. Across the street, an elderly woman in a floral blouse stepped onto her porch, her expression tight with worry. She didn't call out, but her presence added weight to the moment. The neighborhood was watching, even if from behind cracked blinds and door frames. And that was exactly what the imposters wanted. To them, this wasn't just about Marcus. It was about the spectacle, making an example out of someone who didn't bend. If they could subdue him in front of an audience, their reputation as enforcers would grow. Fear would spread like wildfire. But Marcus knew this game. He had seen it in warlords, in cartel bosses, in power-hungry militia leaders. He had dismantled entire organizations built on the illusion of dominance. And as he looked at these three men, sweating under the weight of their vests, clinging to the brittle shell of borrowed authority, he saw them for what they were. Small men trying to look big. The clipboard woman cleared her throat sharply, forcing her voice into steadiness. "Mr. Johnson, this is your last chance to comply peacefully. We've documented every infraction. Non-compliance will escalate this matter. Sign the notice and come with us, or face consequences." She extended the clipboard toward him, pen poised. Marcus's eyes lingered on the paper but never dropped low enough to read it. He didn't need to. He already knew it was meaningless. A prop. A piece of theater designed to convince anyone who doubted them. Instead, he let his gaze sweep once more across the neighborhood. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing against him, waiting to see if he would fold. And then, calmly, he stepped forward. Not toward the clipboard, but toward the enforcer with the handcuffs. The man straightened, startled for just a fraction of a second. Marcus was close enough now that their faces nearly aligned, only the reflection of his own image in the man's glasses staring back. "You keep waving those handcuffs around," Marcus said quietly. "Like you know what they mean. But tell me, do you even know the first thing about detainment law? Jurisdiction? Federal procedure?" The enforcer stiffened. He didn't answer. Marcus leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him, though the tension in his tone carried across the street. "Because I do." The words struck with the weight of truth. The man's posture faltered, his bravado shrinking, if only for a heartbeat. He glanced toward his partners, searching for backup. The restless one barked again, louder this time, trying to drown out the crack forming in their illusion. "Enough of this. Take him down." But Marcus's voice rose above the order, firm and commanding. Not with volume, but with authority that resonated deep in the bones of anyone who heard it. "You will not touch me." The neighborhood stilled again. Even the wind seemed to pause. And for the first time, the balance of power shifted. Not in the fists gripping handcuffs, not in the clipboard raised like a gavel, but in the quiet resolve of a man who carried true authority within him. The woman hesitated. The leader froze. The restless one took half a step forward, then faltered. They hadn't expected resistance like this. Not the kind that didn't shout, didn't flail, didn't crumble. Marcus's calm presence was more dangerous than any weapon they carried. And in that moment, something inside them cracked. The performance wasn't landing. The neighbors weren't whispering in awe of their power. They were beginning to murmur, confused, questioning. The illusion was slipping. Marcus tilted his head, just slightly, and let a small smile form at the corner of his lips. "This is the part," he said softly, "where you start to realize you picked the wrong man." The air in the cul-de-sac had changed. What began as silent curiosity from behind curtains was shifting into something heavier, more dangerous for the impostors, doubt. One by one, neighbors began to linger at their windows a little longer. A garage door halfway down the street slid open, then stopped midway as its owner froze, watching. An older man with a cane stepped onto his porch, shielding his eyes from the sun as he tried to make sense of the commotion. The spectacle these so-called community enforcement officers had intended to control was now working against them. Marcus could feel it. The shift in energy was subtle but unmistakable. Authority, real authority, thrived on trust and clarity. But imposters survived only on fear and confusion. The moment doubt took root, their power began to crumble. The woman with the clipboard pressed her lips together, tapping her pen rapidly against the edge of the board. Her hands betrayed her nerves. She hadn't expected this level of resistance. She leaned toward the bald leader, muttering under her breath, though Marcus caught every word. "This isn't playing right. He's not scared." The enforcer's jaw tightened, and for the first time, his polished mask of intimidation began to crack. He shot a glare at Marcus, as if trying to burn through him with sheer willpower. "You think standing there makes you untouchable?" He spat, his voice louder now, pitched to reach the neighbors. "This man is in serious violation of our community rules. We're here to do our job, and no amount of grandstanding changes that." He lifted the handcuffs high, metal glinting under the sun, and shook them like a judge slamming a gavel. But the sound didn't carry authority, it carried desperation. Marcus's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, his expression still calm but now sharpened by a razor's edge of focus. "Your job," Marcus said evenly, "is pretending you have one." The words landed with surgical precision. A ripple of murmurs spread from the porches, whispers darting like fireflies between neighbors. Who are these people? Why do they look like police but don't sound like them? The second enforcer, the restless one with darting eyes, snapped at the shift in momentum. His hand went to the baton at his hip, pulling it halfway from its loop before jamming it back with a frustrated grunt. He wanted violence, wanted the spectacle of power. But something about Marcus's stillness made him hesitate. "This is your last warning," the woman called, forcing her voice into a brittle authority. "If you don't comply, we have the right to escalate the situation." Marcus tilted his head, almost sympathetically. "And what exactly does escalation look like for a group that doesn't even exist?" Gasps slipped from a few porches. The illusion was breaking faster now. The words "doesn't exist" hung in the air like thunderclouds. The bald leader sneered, stepping nose to nose with Marcus, his voice dropping low so only Marcus could hear. "You keep talking like you know something. Maybe you do. But out here, none of that matters. We own this block. You're just another name on our list." Marcus's eyes flickered, a shadow of steel crossing his features. He leaned in just enough that his voice carried back the same low intensity. "You don't own anything. And if you knew my name, you wouldn't be here." The leader's jaw worked as if grinding the words he couldn't speak. He didn't know Marcus. Not yet. And that ignorance was the sharpest edge cutting against their facade. A sudden voice rang out across the street, breaking the standoff. "What's going on here?" It was the elderly man with the cane. He stepped down from his porch with a surprising steadiness, his weathered face creased in suspicion. He pointed a shaky finger toward the imposters. "You boys ain't real police. I've lived here 40 years, never seen a badge like that. Community enforcement? What is that supposed to mean?" The murmurs grew louder, spreading through the cul-de-sac like wildfire. The neighbors weren't just watching now, they were questioning. The clipboard woman snapped, her voice shrill with strain. "Stay back, sir. This is an official matter, and interfering will result in consequences for you too." But her words fell flat. Even the elderly man didn't retreat. Instead, he squinted, muttering loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks to me like you're the ones trespassing." The restless enforcer cursed under his breath, shifting uneasily. The leader clenched his handcuffs tighter, as if gripping the last remnants of their authority. The woman's voice cracked as she tried once more to assert control. Mr. Johnson, stop stalling. Neighbors, go back inside. This does not concern you. But it did concern them. The illusion of authority had cracked wide open, and the people were no longer passive spectators. The impostor's greatest weapon, the silence of those they intimidated, was slipping away. Through it all, Marcus remained steady, his posture calm, his voice even. He didn't need to shout to command the moment. His very presence pulled the air into alignment around him. You see what's happening? Marcus said. His gaze fixed on the leader, but his voice pitched for every ear in the street. They hide behind fake titles and borrowed uniforms, hoping you'll believe in their power. But the moment you ask questions, the truth starts leaking out. The murmurs grew into open voices now, some calling out doubts, others whispering to each other. The impostors exchanged glances, the unspoken truth dawning between them. They had come here to make an example of Marcus. Instead, Marcus was turning them into the example, unmasking their game in front of the very audience they wanted to control. For the first time, fear flickered in the impostor's eyes. And Marcus, sensing their unraveling, knew the confrontation was only beginning. The cul-de-sac no longer belonged to the impostors. The performance they staged, the vests, the clipboard, the SUVs, was unraveling thread by thread under the weight of Marcus's composure. What began as a silent standoff had grown into a neighborhood on edge, no longer cowed, no longer convinced. And Marcus knew it. He could feel the balance tipping, like the moment in interrogation when the suspect's bravado finally cracks and the truth spills through the smallest gap. He had lived in those moments for years. Now here they were, standing in his own driveway. The bald leader tried to reclaim the stage. He raised the handcuffs higher, his voice booming across the street. This man is resisting lawful authority. Anyone interfering will be considered complicit. But the words, meant to thunder, landed dull and hollow. Authority wasn't something you declared, it was something others recognized in you. And in that instant, no one believed. Marcus finally moved. Not quickly, not aggressively. He stepped forward with measured calm. Each step deliberate. Each footfall echoing against the silence that followed the impostor's threat. He stopped just inside the man's personal space, forcing him to flinch back half a step. Then Marcus spoke, his tone low and steady. You keep throwing words like lawful authority around. But let's be clear. You've shown no badge, no jurisdiction, no statute. Just a vest you bought online and a clipboard with scribbles. He let the words hang, his gaze sweeping briefly across the neighbors who now stood openly on their porches, arms folded, phones in hand, recording. That, Marcus continued, his voice carrying with the rhythm of certainty, isn't authority, that's theater. The clipboard woman stiffened, her hand trembling as she clutched the board tighter. The restless enforcer muttered under his breath, cursing, shifting his weight like a fighter itching for a punch. The bald leader's nostrils flared, sweat beading on his shaved head. Marcus didn't stop. His calm was relentless, the kind of calm that didn't merely withstand pressure but created it for others. You picked this street because you thought it was easy. A quiet neighborhood. Families who wouldn't question you. People too polite or too scared to stand up. But you didn't count on me. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that everyone could still hear. And I don't scare easy. The murmurs among the neighbors turned into open agreement. A man in a ball cap shouted from across the street, "Yeah, let's see some badges then." Another voice chimed in, "This isn't how the police act." The impostors froze. Their illusion had shattered, and in its place was exposure. Every phone lifted, every lens capturing their faltering performance. The clipboard woman's face flushed. She tried to salvage the moment, her voice wobbling between command and plea. "Mr. Johnson, if you don't cooperate, we'll be forced to escalate." Marcus cut her off, his calm voice slicing clean through hers. "Escalate? Do it. Show us all exactly how far this charade goes. The challenge hit like a hammer. There was no hesitation in his tone, no bluff. He wanted them to act, to expose themselves completely in front of witnesses. The restless enforcer finally cracked. He ripped the baton from his belt and pointed it at Marcus, his voice high and angry. You think this is a joke? We'll put you on the ground. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward the crowd of neighbors, speaking loud enough for all to hear. You see this? This is what happens when lies lose their grip. Violence is the only card they have left. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones zoomed in. The imposters, who came here to humiliate Marcus, now found themselves on trial before an entire street. And still, Marcus stood calm, his eyes fixed on the man with the baton. Go ahead, Marcus said softly, almost inviting. Swing that, and you'll find out faster than you can blink who you're really dealing with. The enforcer's hand trembled. His anger met something deeper, fear. Not of Marcus's size, not of his strength, but of the certainty in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had stood in darker places than this, faced more dangerous enemies, and walked away victorious. The bald leader barked, trying to snap him out of it. Hold it together! His voice cracked at the edges, betraying his own fear. Marcus took a breath, his chest rising slowly, and addressed them all at once. You've got two choices. Walk away now before you dig this hole deeper. Or keep pretending. And let everyone here see what happens when frauds cross the wrong man. For a long moment silence ruled. The imposters exchanged looks, their masks of bravado slipping entirely. And though Marcus's words had been delivered calmly, they carried the unmistakable weight of command. The neighbors could feel it too. Authority had shifted. The imposters no longer looked like enforcers, they looked like cornered animals. Marcus wasn't just defending himself. He was dismantling their entire charade, piece by piece, without ever raising his voice. And then, with perfect timing, Marcus turned his head toward the cluster of neighbors and gave the smallest, warmest smile. If you're watching this and you believe in standing up to liars who pretend to hold power, make sure you're with me not just here but every time. Hit that subscribe button right now, and let's keep exposing the truth together. It was effortless, folded seamlessly into the scene, a rallying call that made the neighbors feel like part of something bigger. Then Marcus's eyes shifted back, cold steel returning to his gaze as he looked at the imposters. Your move. The street, once a stage for the imposters' performance, had transformed into an open-air courtroom. What began as whispers behind curtains had evolved into a congregation of watchful eyes, each person stepping out from the safety of their homes, drawn by the gravity of the unfolding confrontation. Phones glimmered in the sunlight like dozens of silent witnesses. Red recording dots blinked back at the imposters, each one another nail in the coffin of their illusion. A young couple walked hand in hand down their driveway, keeping a cautious distance but making no attempt to hide their presence. Two teenagers leaned against their bikes, whispering to each other, their cameras raised high. Even the elderly man with the cane had edged closer to Marcus's lawn, his steps slow but purposeful, like a soldier returning to a battlefield he thought he'd left behind decades ago. The imposters had wanted an audience. They now had one, only the roles were reversed. Instead of intimidating the crowd, they were being measured, judged, and recorded in real time. The clipboard woman's voice wavered as she tried to reassert control, her pen jabbing toward the neighbors as though it were a weapon. Everyone back inside. This is official business. You are interfering with an enforcement action. Her words rang hollow, bouncing against the growing chorus of doubt. From across the street, a mother clutching her toddler called out, "Then show us a badge." Real police don't hide their credentials. The restless enforcer's jaw clenched. He muttered something foul under his breath, his hand twitching near the baton he still hadn't dared to swing. He looked at the crowd, then at Marcus, then back at the crowd again. Each glance screamed the same thing. We're losing them. Marcus remained still, rooted in calm. He knew the power of silence, how it could magnify tension until it broke someone else first. His eyes never left the bald leader, but his words were meant for everyone. You see how quick they are to bark orders, Marcus said, his voice steady, carrying like a sermon across the cul-de-sac. But when asked for proof, for accountability, they fall silent. That's because there's nothing behind the mask. The murmurs grew louder. One neighbor whispered, "He's right." Another muttered, "This isn't real. These guys aren't cops." The bald leader gritted his teeth, sweat dripping down his temples. He knew the illusion was gone, but his pride forced him to cling to it. He raised the cuffs again, rattling them loudly. "You're making a mistake, Johnson. We will take you in." Marcus's head tilted, almost pitying. "No," he said softly. "The mistake was ever thinking you could take me at all." It was then that the elderly man with the cane, emboldened by Marcus's calm, stepped onto the edge of Marcus's lawn. His voice, cracked but strong, carried a lifetime of defiance. "Son," he said, addressing Marcus without taking his eyes off the imposters. "You need anything, we got your back. This is our neighborhood, not theirs." The words sent a ripple of courage through the crowd. Others stepped closer, not aggressively, but firmly. The couple moved forward, the man placing a protective arm around his partner as they stood beside their mailbox, phones still recording. A teenager called out, "Yo, these dudes are fake. I'm posting this right now." The imposters shifted uneasily. Their plan had depended on isolation, on Marcus standing alone while they projected dominance. Instead, they were now surrounded by witnesses ready to challenge their every move. The clipboard woman's composure finally broke. Her voice cracked as she snapped at the bald leader. "Do something. Control this before it gets worse." But the leader's hands trembled. For the first time, doubt clouded his face. His bluster had been his weapon, and Marcus had stripped it away layer by layer, leaving nothing but exposed weakness. Marcus's voice cut through their panic, low and unyielding. "You see how fear works? It only controls people when they believe in it. But once it's broken," he swept a hand lightly toward the crowd, "it doesn't come back." Neighbors nodded. Someone clapped. Another muttered, "That's right." The tide had turned fully. The imposters had no power left, only the memory of what they hoped to wield. They glanced at each other, searching desperately for an exit strategy. But every move they made was caught on camera, every hesitation magnified by the eyes of the crowd. And Marcus, still calm, still unshaken, knew it was time to press further. The hunt had shifted. He wasn't the prey they were. The imposter's illusion had already started to collapse. But it was the woman with the clipboard who refused to let it die quietly. She straightened her navy blazer, pressed her trembling hands flat against the hardboard, and tried to summon the voice of command she had practiced in the mirror 100 times. "Enough," she snapped, her words slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. "Mr. Johnson is under arrest for repeated violations of community standards. Anyone interfering is obstructing an enforcement officer in the line of duty. This is your last warning." She delivered the lines with crisp diction, the kind that had clearly been rehearsed, memorized, maybe even written on that clipboard she clutched like a shield. But the delivery couldn't mask the truth. The quiver in her voice, the faint red blooming across her cheeks, the sweat tracing a line down her temple. Marcus let her speak. He didn't interrupt, didn't laugh, didn't sneer. He let her empty authority echo into the quiet street, each word falling flatter than the last. Then, when she finally stopped, chest heaving as though she'd won some battle, Marcus tilted his head and spoke with disarming calm. "Tell me something," he said. "What exactly are community standards? Because I've read federal statutes, state codes, municipal ordinances, but nowhere in the law have I found a single enforceable crime called non-compliance with community standards." Gasps spread through the crowd. The phrase, once a vague but intimidating threat, now sounded ridiculous. Marcus stepped forward, slow and deliberate. His voice softened, but his words cut sharper than any shout. "You're standing here, pretending you have the right to take me away, but let's peel back the mask. Who gave you this authority? The county? The state? The federal government? Show me one signature, one seal, one shred of legitimacy." He gestured lightly toward the clipboard. All you've got is paper. Paper anyone could print in a basement office. The woman's grip on the board tightened until her knuckles whitened. She sputtered, her script unraveling. You don't understand the seriousness of this matter, she barked. These infractions, your lawn, your fence, your non-compliance, they destabilize the entire community. Her words, meant to sting, instead sparked laughter from one of the neighbors. A fence destabilizing the community? You kidding me? Another voice chimed in, louder, bolder now. Sounds more like harassment than enforcement. The clipboard woman's composure cracked. She whirled toward the crowd, her voice shrill. Quiet. All of you. You have no authority here. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The words she screamed at the neighbors were the very words they saw reflected in her. No authority. Marcus seized the moment. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man accustomed to interrogations that ended in confessions. You came here to humiliate me, to parade me out in front of my neighbors as an example of your power. But look around you. He swept his hand across the street. Dozens of phones raised higher. Neighbors stood closer together. Faces hardened, no longer curious but resolute. You're the ones on display now. The woman's face reddened, her mask crumbling. She looked at the bald leader, at the restless enforcer, searching for backup. But they gave her none. They too felt the unraveling, the weight of exposure pressing down on their vests until they seemed like little more than cheap costumes. Desperation flared in her eyes. She lifted the clipboard like it was a warrant, jabbing the pen toward Marcus. This paper, she shouted, her voice cracking, is your eviction, your removal, your... Marcus cut her off with a single sentence, spoken so evenly it silenced the entire street. That paper is nothing. The words landed like a gavel strike. Final. Absolute. The crowd erupted. Not in cheers, not in jeers, but in the collective murmur of realization. The woman's authority had been broken. Her clipboard, once a prop of intimidation, now looked like a child's toy in her trembling hands. Marcus stepped closer, his voice soft but merciless. You came into my neighborhood, to my home, dressed in lies and armed with theater. But you forgot one thing. Lies don't survive in the light. The woman's shoulders sagged. For the first time, she looked less like an officer and more like what she truly was. A desperate player in a crumbling performance. And the neighbors, sensing the shift, closed ranks around Marcus with their presence. The imposters were no longer facing one man. They were facing an entire community that had awoken to the truth. The clipboard woman's voice died in her throat. Her shoulders shook with the strain of holding together a facade that no longer existed. Around her, the bald leader's jaw was locked tight, sweat dripping down his temple, while the restless enforcer shifted from foot to foot, baton still trembling in his hand. They had expected an easy scene. A man alone, frightened, bending beneath the weight of their false uniforms. Instead, they had been dismantled, methodically, piece by piece, by a man who hadn't raised his voice, hadn't lifted a hand. And Marcus wasn't finished. He looked at the crowd first, the neighbors who stood shoulder to shoulder now, their phones steady, their eyes burning with questions. He wanted them to hear it as much as the imposters. His calm voice carried across the street like a blade cutting through fog. You want to know who I am? Why I'm not afraid. He took one step forward, then another until he was standing squarely in the center of his driveway. His presence filled the space like a shadow stretching over the imposters. I've spent the last 20 years of my life dealing with men just like them, Marcus said, nodding toward the trio. Men who think intimidation is power. Men who wear costumes to feel strong. Men who believe fear is enough to control people. The restless enforcer scoffed, trying to cover his own unease. You're bluffing. Just another loudmouth homeowner. Marcus's gaze flicked toward him, sharp and unflinching. Cartels in Mexico tried to call me that, Marcus said evenly. Arms traffickers in Eastern Europe thought the same. Domestic terror cells right here on U.S. soil laughed in my face once. Do you know where they are now? The street was silent. The only sound was the faint buzz of cicadas in the trees. Marcus let the silence stretch, let the weight of his words sink in. Then he delivered the truth with the precision of a blade. They're gone, because I put them there. A ripple surged through the crowd. Neighbors glanced at one another, brows raised, lips parted. Even the elderly man with the cane straightened, his eyes narrowing as though recognizing something deeper in Marcus's stance. His voice. Marcus took another step forward. His tone remained calm, but there was no mistaking the undercurrent of iron. I am not your neighbor who keeps to himself. I am not just Marcus Johnson. I am a federal agent of the United States government. I have spent my career hunting down threats to this country, dismantling organizations that thought they were untouchable. And you three. He let his eyes sweep across them one by one, pinning them in place with nothing more than a gaze. You're nothing but amateurs playing dress-up. The clipboard woman's face went pale. The restless enforcer's mouth fell open, baton lowering to his side as though it weighed 100 pounds. The bald leader swallowed hard, his facade of confidence shattering under the revelation. Marcus's voice grew colder, sharper, each word striking like a hammer. You came to my door thinking you could make an example out of me. What you didn't realize is that I've spent years making examples out of men far more dangerous than you. He stepped closer, so close now that the bald leader had to crane his neck upward to meet Marcus's gaze. Here's the reality. You're not the hunters. You're the hunted. Gasps broke out among the crowd. Someone whispered, FBI. Another muttered, no way, he's serious. Marcus didn't need to flash a badge. His words, his presence, his calm certainty did what no plastic prop could. He didn't posture, he declared. And in doing so, he stripped the imposters of the last shred of their illusion. The bald leader tried to find his voice, but when it came, it wavered. Why you can't prove that? You could be lying. Marcus leaned in, his eyes locked on the man's trembling reflection in the mirrored sunglasses. Try me. The leader recoiled, his breath catching. The restless enforcer stepped back entirely, muttering under his breath, his bravado gone. Even the clipboard woman lowered the board she'd clutched so tightly, her arms sagging under the weight of humiliation. Marcus turned, not to them but to the neighbors, the people they had hoped to frighten. Authority doesn't come from costumes or loud threats. Comes from truth. And the truth is simple. They don't have any power here. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in energy, voices rising in solidarity. Phones captured every second, every crack in the imposter's armor, every ounce of strength in Marcus's calm reveal. The imposters, once towering figures of intimidation, now looked small, exposed, outnumbered, powerless. And Marcus, for the first time, let the steel in his eyes soften as he looked at his community. Not as an agent, but as their neighbor. You don't have to be afraid of people like this anymore. Not today. Not ever. The imposters had come to make an example of Marcus. Instead, Marcus had made an example of them. The imposters stood frozen in Marcus's driveway, their once confident swagger reduced to jittery glances and shallow breaths. The bald leader's hands twitched at his sides, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting not dominance but fear. The restless enforcer, who had once gripped his baton like a weapon, now clutched it as though it might betray him. And the clipboard woman clung to her board like driftwood in a storm, her eyes darting from Marcus to the neighbors who surrounded them. The crowd had shifted too. They were no longer passive observers but active participants, a wall of witnesses with cameras raised high and voices sharper by the minute. Every second recorded was another layer of accountability, another weight pressing down on the imposter's crumbling act. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm presence was louder than their panicked bluster. Here's how this goes, Marcus said, his words slow, deliberate, final. You're going to put down the cuffs, drop the baton, and walk away. Right now. The clipboard woman sputtered, her voice cracking. Why you can't order us? Marcus's eyes cut to her, silencing her mid-sentence. I can. And I just did. The restless enforcer shifted uneasily. We're just doing our job. Marcus stepped forward, the movement controlled but commanding. Your job? Your job is impersonation, fraud, harassment, and you've been caught in the act. He gestured toward the wall of phones, capturing every word, every twitch of fear. This neighborhood is your courtroom. Every camera here is evidence. You think you can walk away from this unscathed? The bald leader swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. His hands trembled around the cuffs he still held. His voice was low, strained. We didn't mean. Marcus leaned in, his gaze locking on him like a predator who'd already decided the outcome. You meant every second of it. You came here to scare me, to parade me like a trophy in front of my neighbors. But the hunt's over. He stepped even closer, his shadow covering the bald leader. And now you're the prey. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Another murmured, "He's got them cornered." The clipboard woman's composure finally snapped. Her eyes darted to the crowd, then back to Marcus. She raised her clipboard like a shield, her voice breaking. Let's just go. We don't need this." The bald leader's pride flared, but only for a moment. He looked around at the sea of eyes, the recording phones, the man standing before him who radiated power he couldn't match. His shoulders sagged, the cuffs in his hand lowered. Slowly, reluctantly, he slid them back onto his belt. The restless enforcer muttered under his breath, his baton dipping. He looked at Marcus, then at the neighbors, then finally shoved the baton back into his vest pocket, his face flushed with shame. Marcus didn't move, didn't celebrate. He simply stood, watching them unravel under the weight of their own cowardice. "You thought fear would protect you," Marcus said, his voice steady, resonant. "But fear doesn't last when the truth steps into the light. And the truth is, you're done here." The clipboard woman tugged at the bald leader's arm. "Let's go. Now." They turned, slowly at first, then quicker as the murmurs of the crowd followed them down the street. Each step was recorded, every stumble immortalized. The impostors, once towering figures of intimidation, now looked small, retreating figures fading under the harsh gaze of truth. Marcus stood firm at the edge of his driveway, watching them leave. He didn't chase. He didn't need to. The hunt had already ended, and the prey had been driven out. Then he turned to the neighbors, his expression softening. "This," he said, sweeping a hand toward the retreating figures, "is what happens when we stand together, when we refuse to bend under false power." The neighbors nodded, their murmurs turning to quiet words of respect. Someone clapped, then another, until the street filled with applause. Not loud, not chaotic, but steady, a rhythm of solidarity. And for the first time, the impostor's presence meant nothing. Because Marcus had turned the tables, and the neighborhood had learned the truth. They weren't alone. The impostors disappeared down the block, their steps quickening as the weight of humiliation chased them harder than any siren could. The sound of their retreat echoed off the quiet houses, swallowed by the night air. Then silence settled, a heavy, almost sacred silence that hung over the street like a curtain finally falling on a bad play. For a moment, no one spoke. Dozens of neighbors stood frozen in place, phones still raised, breaths held as though afraid the impostors might suddenly return. But they didn't. They wouldn't. Then the first voice broke through. You handled them like they were nothing," an elderly woman whispered, awe in her eyes. Another neighbor chimed in, younger, phone still recording. "Man, I thought they were real cops. I was ready to believe every word they said. But you called them out like you knew their script before they even read it." Marcus exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing for the first time since the confrontation began. His eyes softened as he scanned the faces around him. Not adversaries, not strangers, but people who lived just steps away. People who had almost been drawn into the impostor's web. "They wanted you to believe in their power," Marcus said quietly. "That's how fear works. It convinces you to give away control without a fight. But fear doesn't hold up against the truth. The neighbors drew closer now, forming a circle around him. The elderly man with the cane nodded, his voice firm. "Son, I knew you weren't like the rest of us. The way you stood there, calm as a stone. That's no ordinary man." Marcus smiled faintly, though the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ordinary is what I've been trying to be. But some things don't stay hidden forever." A teenager stepped forward, her phone still live-streaming. "Are you really FBI?" she asked, eyes wide with wonder. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't confirm, didn't deny. He simply gave her the same steady look he had given the imposters. "Let's just say I've seen enough to know how to handle people like them." The crowd murmured, whispers turning into low conversations, stories spilling out of neighbors who admitted they'd felt bullied, intimidated, even targeted by similar tactics before. The imposters hadn't just picked Marcus, they had been preying on vulnerability, exploiting silence. And tonight, that silence had shattered. Marcus raised a hand, drawing the neighbor's attention back to him. His voice was calm but carried weight. "Listen to me. They may come back. Maybe not the same people, maybe not in the same uniforms. But there will always be someone who thinks they can control you with fear. Don't give them that power. Stand together. Record everything. Question authority that doesn't show its proof." He paused, his gaze moving across each face in the crowd. "Don't let anyone make you feel small in your own home." The words sank deep, stirring something unspoken in the neighbors. A woman holding her toddler wiped a tear from her cheek. A man in work boots nodded slowly, his jaw tight with conviction. The teenager ended her live stream with a simple caption, "We're stronger together." Then Marcus did something unexpected. He smiled. Not the faint, cautious smile from before, but one full of warmth. "And if you haven't already," he said, his voice taking on a lighter tone, "make sure you click that subscribe button below, because this isn't the last story, and trust me, you'll want to be here for what's coming next." Laughter rippled through the crowd, easing the tension, breaking the heaviness that had weighed on the air. It was the kind of laughter born from relief, from shared survival. As the neighbors slowly dispersed, returning to their porches and doorsteps, one thing was clear. The imposters hadn't just been defeated. A neighborhood had been awakened. And Marcus, standing at the center of it all, no longer looked like the quiet man who lived behind the wooden fence. He looked like a sentinel, a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes speaks calmly, dismantles lies, and leaves the truth standing tall. The night had shifted. The neighborhood had changed. And Marcus Johnson, once just a name on a mailbox, was now something more. The night grew quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence that had followed the imposters' retreat. This silence carried weight, carried memory. Porch lights glowed softly along the street, illuminating neighbors who lingered just a little longer outside, unwilling to return to normal too quickly. Something had shifted tonight, and they all knew it. Marcus remained in his driveway, hands resting loosely at his sides. The tension that had coiled inside him all evening began to ease, but his mind replayed every detail. The false uniforms, the trembling voices, the fear that had nearly taken root in the people he now saw as more than neighbors. He thought of the years he had spent chasing threats across borders, infiltrating cells where shadows ruled, dismantling networks that thrived on secrecy and fear. And yet, tonight's battlefield was not a desert halfway across the world or a hidden compound on foreign soil. It was his own front yard, his own community. A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Thank you," said the elderly woman who had first spoken earlier. She stood a few feet away, her hands clasped together, eyes glistening with gratitude. Marcus gave her a gentle nod. "You don't need to thank me. You stood your ground too. That matters more than you know." She shook her head. "No, we wouldn't have if you hadn't shown us how." Her words lingered. Marcus looked out at the faces still watching him, curious, grateful, even inspired, and he realized something. For years, his work as an agent had been about dismantling enemies no one ever saw, removing threats most people would never know existed. He had always worked in shadows, unseen, his victories invisible. But here, in this neighborhood, in this moment, his strength had been seen. And in being seen, it had lit something in others. He stepped onto the curb, addressing the neighbors not as an agent, but as a man who wanted them to walk away with more than relief. "Tonight wasn't about me," Marcus said, his voice steady but warm. "It was about you, about all of us. Fear only works when it divides us, when it convinces us to stand alone. But the moment we stood together, when you raised your cameras, when you refused to look away, that's when they lost." He let the words sink in, the silence that followed filled with meaning rather than fear. You don't need a badge to demand respect. You don't need a title to protect your home. All you need is the courage to speak truth, even when your voice shakes. The neighbors nodded, the lesson embedding itself like roots finding soil. Some would remember tonight as the night the impostors were chased out. But Marcus hoped they would remember it as the night they discovered their own strength. The elderly man with the cane raised it slightly in a salute. "We'll be ready next time." Marcus smiled, a real one this time. "I believe you will." Slowly, the crowd dispersed, neighbors retreating to their porches with a new sense of solidarity. The street grew quiet again, but it was no longer vulnerable silence. It was the calm of a community that had seen its own reflection in the face of intimidation and found courage staring back. Marcus turned at last toward his door. The wooden fence that had once been a boundary now felt like a line that connected him to everyone beyond it. He wasn't just the man behind the fence anymore. He was part of them. As he stepped inside, the porch light casting a warm glow behind him, his voice lingered in the night air, carried by memory more than sound. "Stand together. Fear nothing. The truth will always outlast the lie." The door clicked shut, and the story ended, not with chaos, but with a calm resolve. Because the most feared agent wasn't feared for his badge, or his title, or his victories in secret wars. He was feared because he knew the truth. And tonight, he had given that truth to everyone around him. And that truth, once shared, would never be taken away.